Use the derivative formula f prime of a equals the limit as x goes to a of f of x minus f of a divided by x minus a to find the derivative of f of x equals x squared plus 4x plus 3, where a equals to a negative 1. So the first thing we're going to do is write that derivative formula for the a value of negative 1. That will give us f prime of negative 1 equals the limit as x goes to a negative 1 of f of x minus f of negative 1 divided by x minus a negative 1. The next thing to do is to evaluate f of negative 1 and put it into place and write in the function f of x. So we have f of x is x squared plus 4x plus 3 minus f of negative 1. That means to plug a negative 1 in for every x. So we'll have a negative 1 squared plus 4 times a negative 1 plus a 3. Make sure to subtract that entire quantity, and then all of this is over x minus a negative 1, which is x plus 1. This will be the 0 over 0 indeterminate form, and will continue to be until you can factor the numerator to get an x plus 1 factor to cancel with the x plus 1 factor in the denominator. To be able to factor that numerator, we're going to need to work out that number in square brackets and combine it with the remaining expression. Then we have to factor that expression. So we will have the limit as x goes to negative 1 of x squared plus 4x plus 3, subtracting in the brackets negative 1 squared, which is 1. A 4 times a negative 1 is a negative 4, and then plus 3. So we have limit as x goes to negative 1 of x squared plus 4x plus 3 minus, in the square brackets, 1 minus a negative 1 minus a 4 is a negative 3, and then plus 3. Those will come out to a 0. And that means we will have limit as x goes to negative 1 of x squared plus 4x plus 3 over x plus 1. This is still the 0 over 0 indeterminate form, because if you plug in a negative 1 in the numerator, you get a 0. If you plug a negative 1 in the denominator, you also get a 0, and we have to factor that numerator. It's a trinomial quadratic. And because x is going to negative 1, I expect an x plus 1 factor in the numerator. We'll see if that happens. But it's x squared, so we have an x and an x. We need two numbers that multiply to be a positive 3 and add to be a positive 4. It sounds like a plus 3 and a plus 1 take care of that. And there is the x plus 1 factor in the numerator and denominator. Those can cancel out, at which point we no longer have the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. We can plug in negative 1 into the remaining x's. Negative 1 plus 3 is going to equal to 2. What we just found was f prime of negative 1, which means the derivative of f of x, and then evaluated at negative 1, that comes out to a 2.